Special guest talking Nebraska football, talking media coverage, and what we see in the near and long-term future.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download FanDuel today. All right, welcome in. It's a Friday special game day edition of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Nebraska at Minnesota tonight at 7 o'clock. I'm Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor is out today. If you're looking for our mailbag, typical of a Friday, that posted on Thursday. It's there in your feed. Joining me for a full episode, Dirk Chatelain, the award-winning writer, columnist, and author formerly of the Omaha World-Herald. Dirk, welcome back to the pod.
Hey, this is fun, Mitch. I'm glad you asked me to do it.
Yeah, so happy to have you to go over some of the topics of the day in Nebraska, and there's no shortage right now of interesting things that are happening around Lincoln and around the state. We'll get to the pleasantries when we come back for the second segment, but I want to get to the meat of things immediately. This week has been one like nothing in recent history at Nebraska. The state of the Huskers is no stranger to drama and uncertainty and tension, but we have never, at least not since 1978, and I don't think the minute-by-minute tracking 47 years ago was quite at the level of today. We have never had a Nebraska football head coach possibly under courtship from another major program. So I want to ask you about your perspective of the coverage nationally and locally of the situation, but don't answer that now, because first, what are your thoughts on this situation as a whole? Simply that it is even happening.
Well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is if there's a Matt Rhule, James Franklin trade at the end of the season, does Penn State have to throw in NIL money or draft picks or anything like that?
Draft picks, yeah, that would come with it. James Franklin to Nebraska is a new angle to this. We haven't gotten that far down the road on it. I don't know how that would be received.
You know, it's interesting, Mitch. A week ago, not so much after the Oregon loss, but certainly after the UCLA loss, I was wondering, maybe aloud in my own house a little bit, like why there wasn't a little bit more concern in Nebraska world about Matt Rhule to Penn State, and I'm not frequenting the deep dark corners of the internet like I might have been doing 5 years ago.
Yeah,
but
we weren't talking about it here after UCLA or Oregon.
Yeah, I'm because it felt like this was coming. Like you could kind of feel it. And I think the thing that, because I've got a couple friends in Pennsylvania that I talk to about stuff like this. One of whom is pretty well connected in the media world, and another who has Penn State friends, and the reverence for Rhule there is really strong. I mean, it's a culture that loves the old ways, similar to Nebraska, and the idea of bringing in a walk-on linebacker who played for Joe Paterno and is not only from that part of the world, but can recruit that part of the world and speak the language of Penn State fans. I mean, Matt Rhule's a really good fit for this. And I think people are overthinking it if they start studying his record against top 25 competition and things like that. I mean, I think it's a bigger picture than that. They're looking for, in my opinion, Penn State will be looking for a Penn State fit. And I think Matt Rhule, unfortunately for Nebraska, fits that mold about as well as anybody in the world.
Yeah, it first came on my radar. I mean, it's in the back of my mind, of course. I recognize that if James Franklin loses his job, and this is me thinking before Sunday, yes, Matt Rhule is going to come up. It didn't register for me that Franklin would be fired early in the season or midway through the season until Saturday afternoon. And the Penn State Northwestern game was ending, or it was around the same time as the Nebraska game at Maryland. And I was tracking that a little bit, but the Nebraska Maryland game was dramatic in its own way in the second half. So most of my focus is there. At one point I was keeping tabs on Indiana at Oregon, and I'd lost track of where that went. And in fact, it wasn't even until the post-game press conference was over at Nebraska that I knew who won that game. But I did know who won the Penn State game. I was keeping tabs on that, and they were showing it too, showing updates on the video board at Maryland. And I don't know if it was the Maryland or the Nebraska fans, but they were having quite the reaction to it. And it went final. I was sitting next to a writer from DC, and we had been talking during the game a little bit. And I said, James Franklin is going to get fired tomorrow. And it was somewhat said in jest, but not really. And still, I wasn't like, oh my gosh, we're going to be covering this crazy Matt Rhule speculation for all of next week in the foreseeable time forward. So after Rhule's press conference was over, it was a very small room, and he was walking out of the press room, and he came by me, and I said, congrats on the win. I said, did you see the Big Ten scoreboard today? And he said, no, I haven't seen anything. I think he said he saw the early game, like the UCLA beating Michigan State. And I said, Penn State lost. And he, like, his eyes got wide, and he's like, are you really? And I mean, we had no further conversation about him, but it was interesting to like see his initial reaction to that. So
I think I texted you, or we talked a couple of days ago, and I said, I'll be surprised if he doesn't get an offer. Mm-hmm. I don't know, I don't know if he'll take it, but I think he'll get an offer I think he'll get a job offer here.
Yeah, I'm still kind of torn on that. I think Pat Kraft has a great idea. The Penn State athletic director has a great idea of what he wants, and it very much fits with who Matt Rhule is. But so often these coaching searches start with one or two people at the top of the list, whether it's the odds or just they're all the talk. And in the case of Scott Frost to Nebraska, it never wavered. That was a slam dunk in 2017. This is one of those jobs, I think more often than not, they go in unexpected directions for whatever the reason might be. And so I'm a little bit torn on whether he'll get an offer. And then I'm also somewhat torn.
They go in unexpected directions when the guy at the top of the list doesn't say yes.
Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes I think that there's a lot of group. This is what I want to ask you about next. So the coverage of this is interesting because nationally, I think there's a lot of groupthink that's happening. So Rhule went to Penn State. These are facts. He's a great friend of the athletic director, Pat Kraft. His wife went to school there. He loves the university. He loves the football program. Kraft, in talking on Monday about what he wanted in a Penn State coach, described almost down to like the style of Matt Rhule's beard, what he described to Matt Rhule. But I think once Pete Thamel said he was a candidate and Bruce Feldman said he was a candidate and a few other well-sourced reporters in college football started talking about it, and this was all very real, he's a potential candidate. Others have fallen in line behind it, as they tend to do in today's media world, and they start trying to one-up each other. It's a done deal. Who are his coordinators going to be? Can he take Penn State to the college football playoff in year one? This is an interesting time.
I haven't heard any of that. So I'm not deep enough in the weeds.
I mean, in the corners of the sports media world, but okay. So I get to my question. I think for us, for you and me, who came up in this era when engaged content, like readers, viewers engaging with content was not the king of everything because we didn't even really know how much our readers and viewers were engaging. What's it like to sit back and look at how this story in the media is unfolding?
Well, again, I'm not so deep in the weeds that I'm paying attention to who potential coordinators could be.
I'm exaggerating that a little bit, but people feel it's a foregone conclusion.
I just want to tell you where I'm coming from. So,
okay,
my consumption of this is basically that top layer, Andy Staples, Bruce Feldman, that layer of people. And like I said, in addition to a couple connections I have in that part of the world that are not necessarily part of the media circle in Pennsylvania, but are well-connected Penn State people, or at least, pay attention to Penn State football. I was not surprised that Rhule came up. I don't want to say I was a little surprised that that those top level media guys jumped to him right away. Not because anything against Rhule, but it's a little bit when it's we tend to think that everybody's thinking about the guy at Nebraska or the team at Nebraska, and oftentimes they're not, right? I mean, Nebraska has become fairly small in the college football media world over the last
no doubt about
15 years. I mean, I even when people talk about the $2 billion investment in Big Ten football, and Nebraska's doesn't come up very often in those conversations anymore.
They're an afterthought at Big Ten media days. The Huskers are. Yeah,
they are an afterthought, and they're going to have to earn their way back. And it's not just going to have to be a 1-season thing; it's going to have to be a 10-year thing. But I was, my eyebrows jumped a little bit probably Sunday night when I started paying attention to this stuff and how quickly, how quickly they got to Rhule's name, which again squared with some of the conversations that I was having with people in that part of the world. I just think it's an unbelievable fit. And I'm not saying he's going to take the job, but if you're Matt Rhule and you're part of these, this legendary era at Penn State and Joe Paterno, and man, there's got to be a big piece of you. And we've seen this from Roy Williams and Scott Frost and everybody else over the years. But there's got to be a pretty big chunk of your heart that would want to take that job someday. And geez, the AD thing, like, good grief. And he's even kind of a contrast to Franklin in terms of, Franklin was always a good, he's a good talker and all that, but he wasn't a Penn State guy, right? And so he even kind of fits the contrast, in my opinion, of what Penn State would be looking for in terms of, go find a Penn State guy. So I don't know, Mitch. I mean, it's when you say covering this stuff before, one of the things that I've, that stands out in following this stuff over 20, 25 years is just how long these things take now, because the firings never used to happen in mid-October, right? They even
or mid-September if you're Nebraska in 2022.
Yeah, even the ones that just completely derailed, like they would usually at least get to Thanksgiving weekend or maybe a week early. So I think this is going to be a long slog of media speculation.
Absolutely.
And I don't really expect, I mean, unless Penn State goes and hires somebody way off the map, I don't suspect that they're gonna have a coach lined up before Thanksgiving. So we're looking at 6 weeks of this probably. And maybe there'll be clarity at some point. Maybe Rhule comes out at some point and says, "Hey, I'm not going to go to Penn State. I'm going to be the Nebraska coach here next year." And maybe it gets to the point where he feels like he has to do that if in fact that's his intention. But in my opinion, anybody who says they know anything right now is out over their skis. I don't think there's going to be much clarity on this from anybody in the next, at least 4 weeks.
If that's his intention, it would be really wise for him to do that before November 22nd. Well, which is when Nebraska plays at Penn State.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine that, right? Like Penn State is I mean, we may this could be something we've never seen before.
Yeah.
I mean, if it comes out that Rhule is the guy, geez, how do you finish the season, including playing the opponent of the school that you'd be potentially going to? I mean, this is a weird deal. Central Florida didn't play Nebraska in November of 2017, right? I mean, this is a whole different.
Not that I recall. I feel like we would have remembered that circus if it had happened.
I mean, and so like, we've seen this at different levels because, I mean, I went to, in 2007, I flew down to Baton Rouge, in early November, before Bill Callahan was fired. I flew down to Baton Rouge and spent 72 hours with LSU and around Bo
I recall
Pelini,
that.
wrote a big story about Bo. And then 2 weeks after that, I flew to Atlanta and I covered the SEC championship game, including, him on the field victorious afterwards when he'd told players that he was leaving. So we've seen this kind of at different levels over the years, but man, we've never seen one quite like this.
Yeah. All right. Hold that thought. That was a good entry point into the next question I want to ask you, and we'll get to that right after a word from these sponsors. All right, a word from SupplyHouse first. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with SupplyHouse. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. The real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. You need parts for a project? SupplyHouse has next-day delivery. Talk about a game changer. The Parts Finder tool and 3D schematics can save you hours on the job when every detail matters. Join the free Trademaster program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, I should say, a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use the promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. All right, we are back. Actually, we have a message too from DoorDash. It's almost the weekend, and it's time to again recognize an MVP who delivered this week, powered by DoorDash. You can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more time every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For Nebraska, Emmett Johnson last week delivered in a big way. 176 yards rushing, the big 50-yard carry to get the Nebraska offense moving in the fourth quarter. When the pressure was on, he came through. No hesitation, no delay. And if you've been watching week after week, the performance was not a fluke. Emmett Johnson is on a streak. And just like Johnson delivered for Nebraska, DoorDash delivers for you on Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday on your order. Stack it up all season, and you can save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. All right, welcome back. Friday episode of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. I am Mitch Sherman, joined by special guest Dirk Chatelain. Dirk, we ended the last segment talking about some of your experiences in covering coaching carousels in the past, and you mentioned going to LSU and seeing Bo Pelini before Nebraska hired him as head coach after the 2007 season. So I want to ask you, if you were still churning out copy on a daily basis or semi-daily basis, what would you be looking to cover? What kind of an angle would you be looking to approach from this Matt Rhule Penn State story as it festers? Like you said, it's going to continue to fester. There are some in our audience who are saying enough already. We've heard about this for 3 days. Go play the games. We don't want to hear about this until there's some news to report. But that's not the way the news cycle works. People are going to continue to ask questions and want to hear our answers, even when there are no real answers. So how would you approach it?
There's a great paradox here because people want news faster than ever and news churns faster than ever. And yet this this coaching thing is going to play out, it's going to be interminable. I mean, it's 6-7 weeks, like we said. I think I'd probably try to write a story about just a little bit more context to Matt Rhule's relationship with Penn State. So, in the absence of scuttlebutt and media rumor, I would try to write about, Rhule's career there, his connections there. I'd try to talk to people who know Pat Kraft and the Matt Rhule relationship. You have to write about it, but I think you have to try to write about it in a way that is not just innuendo. And generally you do that through biography and context and things like that. So, and obviously there's a Nebraska component to this too. Like, how do people here feel about him? What factors would go into him potentially saying no to Penn State if that job offer would ever come? How does Nebraska sweeten the pot, so to speak? So I think there's lots of ways to do it. I don't think it's real constructive at this point to speculate about, who his coordinators at Penn State would be and things like that. But as you stated, the fascinating part of this is Nebraska is potentially, halfway through its best season in, 9 years, maybe longer than that. So there's a heck of a lot of football topics in this too.
So tell me your general view of him, of Rhule, and why you think he's grown to be as popular as he has around Nebraska, having not yet had a winning regular season.
Well, remind me of that question in 30 seconds, because I do want to make one more point, which is Nebraska could very easily have 4 losses right now. And, if things go...
But it doesn't. They've found a way to win close games.
Right, but I'm saying, like,
such an important part of the stamp that he's put on this program, if you want to look at it from that perspective.
You're right, but my point is this. Even if Nebraska had lost one more game, I don't think there would be as much media speculation nationally about Rhule to Penn State, because...
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, the narrative
that it could shape. If Nebraska had lost the last 2 weeks and was 3-3 right now, would anyone be... would they be saying? Even and he'd be the same guy. He'd have the same relationship with Kraft, the same history at Penn State, and it would be, he hasn't had enough success.
That to me is what's interesting about this, is because the narrative is that, he's doing well at Nebraska, and one more loss, whether it's Cincinnati, Michigan State, whoever, I don't think it would be the same narrative nationally. So
yeah.
And the irony of that is, I don't know if Penn State would look at him any different. I think he could be 3-3 right now, and they might look at him and say he's still the guy because we've seen him do it before. Okay, back to your question, which was what?
Why do you think he's grown to be as popular as he has so quickly at Nebraska?
Well, I think he really bought into the place and articulated an argument for Nebraska that Nebraska didn't always articulate for itself. I think he's become the spokesman not only of the athletic department, but the university as a whole, and probably the entire state. And again, it's not so much like he's glad handing everybody and kissing babies, because there's an element of that. But I think more importantly, he's able to carry the flag and make an argument for the place. And he's very articulate. People really like his values. We saw it from the very first day that he was on campus. I mean, he just has a way of connecting with people through his words. And I don't think people necessarily love him as a football coach yet. I think it's too soon to say that. But I think they love him as a person, and as a spokesman for the university. So if he ever wins big, Mitch, I mean, if they get this thing to 10-2, I think it would break people's hearts if he potentially left. But actually, the irony is, I don't think this team is that great. I don't think he's done a remarkable job on the football field yet. I think the jury's still out on that. But as you said, it's deeper than that. And I think his popularity is much more about the way that he makes a case for Nebraska.
Yeah, well said. All right, I do want to ask you about this team. We're going to take another break. Short segment here. One more segment with Dirk Chatelain when we come back. But right now, a word from Rugiet. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Go Long. That's exactly where Rugiet's Go Long slogan comes in. This isn't just another ED pill. It's a total game changer for confidence. Go Long combines 2 doctor-trusted medications in one dual-action formula, so you can go the distance. The process is simple. Connect with a board-certified doctor 100% online, and if prescribed, your treatment ships discreetly right to your door. Ready to level up your confidence in the bedroom? Head to Rugiet.com. That's Rugiet.com and use promo code LockedOnCollege for 15% off your first order. That's Rugiet.com, promo code LockedOnCollege. Make sure to use our code so they will know that we sent you. And a word from FanDuel. The NFL season is in mid-season form, and FanDuel is making sure you are ready with the can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. At Locked On Nebraska, we love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Player props, are you building a same-game parlay, even jumping in as the action unfolds. We got a big weekend of college football ahead of us that starts tonight, of course, with Nebraska at Minnesota. There's a Miami-Louisville game, I believe, on the schedule tonight. Big games tomorrow. Huge day in the SEC with Georgia and Ole Miss and Tennessee, Bama. USC Notre Dame is going on this weekend. And then, of course, the full slate of NFL action. FanDuel is quick. It's easy. It's the best way to add a little more energy to your NFL Sunday. So if you're ready to play, go do it. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, final segment on this Friday episode, game day edition of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. I am pleased to be joined today by my former colleague from my Omaha World-Herald days, Dirk Chatelain, formerly of the Omaha World-Herald. Dirk, does most of your time stay busy now just taking care of kids and coaching basketball, or what's how much sports do you digest? What's a day in the life of Dirk Chatelain like these days?
Oh, it's fascinating, Mitch. It's a fascinating life. I'm doing probably 6 or 7 different things that the metaphor I always use is instead of having one big ball in the air, I've got 6 or 7 little balls in the air. And some of that is coaching and youth basketball. Some of it's writing projects on the side. The thing that I've enjoyed is having the flexibility to put something down for a while and come back to it. So at some point when the kids are a little bit older and don't depend on me quite as much, I'd like to get back into this on a little bit more full-time basis, but I'm really enjoying the flexibility of it right now.
Cool. Glad it's keeping you busy and happy. So, all right, back to our discussion about Nebraska football. And we kind of started to wind into talking about this team a little bit. And I want to ask you one question about that before we wrap up. So what do you think? Nebraska is winning games by playing well in the fourth quarter. It's not beating itself. The special teams are fantastic. Turnovers are down. They're making clutch plays. The penalty numbers are fine. This is kind of revolutionary stuff for Nebraska fans who've been conditioned to misery for not just like the last 7 or 8 years. Matt Rhule came in and Nebraska had 6 consecutive losing seasons, and then it grew to 7 before last year unfolded with the 7-6 season. But it's been almost 20 years since Nebraska's actually enjoyed a season, and maybe this won't be the one, but where things just kind of went well throughout. So what's your take on that?
I've said this before, Mitch, but it's fascinating. You could make, if you ask the question, when is the last time Nebraska football exceeded expectations?
Mm-hmm.
How far back do you have to go?
Well, for a while in 2016, like certainly to this point of the year, Mike Riley's second team did, but it didn't. As a whole, it's hard to remember for me what the expectations were in 2009.
I think the answer is 2008. I think.
Pelini's first year.
Yeah.
Bo Pelini's first year, because you're coming off of an unbelievably, difficult to swallow 2007 season where a coach is fired, and then 08 comes and you finish with the Alex Henry 57 yard field goal. Yeah, that game, that season,
17 years.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, there cannot be a program in America that has waited 17 years for a season that exceeded expectations.
Yeah. If Nebraska wins 10 this year, it's exceeded expectations, and that would include a bowl win. Yeah.
Yep. No, I think they remind me a little bit of some of those late stage Pelini teams that were, I felt like the records were better than the actual product. 2013, 14, especially, even 2012, even 2012. Because I didn't think those teams were great teams, but they, as you compared to this year, they found a way to win in the fourth quarter. Which, hey man, at this point in the progression, that's what you're looking for. You just care about wins. I don't think you necessarily care what it looks like. It's got a little bit of like a vintage Iowa feel to it right now, where the product is not pretty, but the record is good. And when you look at this schedule, the last half of the season with Penn State, going off the tracks, 10-2 is certainly on the table. I think the issue for Nebraska is you can beat everybody on your schedule. You can also lose to everybody on your schedule. So if it balances out, they're probably looking more like 8 or 9 wins. But I do think you have to put some stock in the fact that teams, when they go through this process, and you continually win games in the fourth quarter, you do develop a little bit of an armor, a little bit of a sense of confidence and grit that is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, and Rhule has made reference to that time and time again, but you kind of put yourself in this spot and you succeed, and then it gets a little bit easier the next time. And at some point you just kind of expect it, right? We certainly saw that in 2012 with Nebraska when they made that, incredible run to the Big Ten championship game. They won a bunch of games late in the season by fairly small margins. And, eventually it came back and they kind of got exposed, and I imagine Nebraska would get exposed if they played in Oregon or in Ohio State. But again, where they are in the progression, any win is a good win at this point. And I think the more Nebraska performs in the clutch, the easier it gets to do it again and again and again. And the schedule is set up to enable this. So if they can find a way to win the next couple, Mitch, that USC thing is gonna feel like an enormous football game.
Okay. You don't have to go into depth on this because I have one question past this that I want to ask you. And I was going to just skip to the last one, but I've written it on YouTube on the little side rail here that I would get to this one at the bottom. So what's the scenario most likely to happen? Again, you don't need to give me a detailed explanation. Nebraska finishes strong and Rhule stays. That's clearly the preferred path of most Nebraska fans. Nebraska finishes poorly and Rhule stays. Nebraska finishes strong and Rhule goes. Nebraska finishes poorly and Rhule goes.
I think the percentages would tell you, and I'll explain my answer because I know you told me to get to it quick, but I think the percentages would tell you that the most likely scenario is that Nebraska finishes well and Rhule stays. Because in order for Rhule to leave, 2 things would have to happen. He would have to be offered the job, which, there's maybe a less than 50-50 scenario there, and then he would have to take it. So there's 2 variables there that would have to team up in order for him to leave. So I think the odds would tell you that Nebraska finishes well and he stays. Mitch, I'm not going to make any friends doing this. My hunch is that they will finish well and he will leave. And, them finishing well, I'm not even sure is that relevant to whether he stays or leaves. I mean, I think they can't bottom out. They can't go 7-5. But I think he's kind of a made man there, and he's a proven product. And I don't think, Penn State fans demand that he finishes the season in the top 15 in the country in order to be a compelling candidate. So that's kind of where my hunch is, Mitch.
I should say, I'm aware of the comments that Matt Rhule made on the Pat McAfee show on Thursday, where he said Nebraska's a destination job and that he hopes Penn State finds the best coach for Penn State. If you parse through his words, he didn't say anything definitive in that interview. He worded it very smartly. That's not to say that he's made up his mind about anything, but he continues to walk the line that he needs to walk in order to not stick his foot in his mouth in this situation, several weeks down the road. So we are aware. We do know that if you're yelling at your car radio or your computer at this point. Last question for you. All right. Changing directions. I wanted to save.
And Mitch, I do want to say that just as a consumer of Nebraska football and, a person who cares about the program, I want him to stay. I think he's a great representation of the program. And I think, I think Nebraska's, clearly an improved product. I mean, I'm certainly not rooting for him to leave. I didn't get that impression. I'm just telling you. Yeah, I'm just telling you what my hunch is.
Right. Okay, Nebraska volleyball. Last thing on the docket here, because I know you follow that sport closely and what John Cook did in 25 years at Nebraska. What strikes you from seeing this transition to Danny Busboom-Kelly, who's got the number one team in the country that appears unstoppable when they play at their best, and the job that she's done in her first year?
Well, I think it's gone as well as can be expected so far. I mean, there's a lot of depth on that roster, and I think it takes a seasoned coach it would take a seasoned coach anyway to distribute the credit and the touches and, satisfy everybody's egos in a good way. I think it would take a seasoned coach to do it. It's even harder to do it when you're walking in the door first year as head coach. So I do think it's a challenging task this year. I think so far it's been about as good as anybody could have hoped. And as you noted, which is, I think, the important part, when Nebraska plays its best, I think they're the best team in the country. I think most people would agree with that. So the ceiling here is really, really high. And Danny Busboom-Kelly, I think, is probably looking at the big picture here. And how do we get this team to peak at the right time? Because sometimes when you have a team that's got this much experience together, they don't always peak at the right time. So I think the challenge here is going to be, how do we make sure that this team is playing its best in December when they might not actually get challenged until a Final Four match or a regional final, and you don't want to have them in a situation, similar to last year, where they get to that big stage and suddenly they don't play well at all. I'm having flashbacks to, a 2001 team, for instance, Mitch, where they were absolutely loaded and best team in the country and best team in school history. And they get to the last couple sets in the Final Four. And man, volleyball, it can change in a moment. Right. So you've really got to dial this thing into the point where, they're not only the number one team in the country, but they're ready for those critical little 3 to 4 to 5 minute stretches in a close match.
It's really starting to become, for me at least, and there's so many stories with that team, and I love reporting on them and writing about them because they're all fantastic to be able to dive into their stories. But it's really starting to become a thing with me where the rest of this season is just the appetizer, and Nebraska is just going to wow the fans in every gym that it goes into, almost to the point where it wows the players that it's going against until it faces one team, probably at the end, and it's the only team out there, the only program out there right now that is not going to be wowed by Nebraska, that is not going to be awestruck by Nebraska, that is not going to feel intimidated because it's on the court with Nebraska, and that is Texas.
Well, and it puts an enormous amount of pressure on a team. And again, there are comparisons to this in the past. The one that, for instance, the one that I keep going back to is 2001 because Nebraska was defending national champions. They were loaded. They were the most talented team, I think, maybe in school history. But it puts an enormous amount of pressure, Mitch, when you get to, when it's 24-23 in the first set and you haven't had a match really all season, or at least for a couple months maybe, where you felt the weight of that pressure, right? And suddenly you've got to have it at that moment. And Nebraska didn't respond very well to that last year. And so I think handling the pressure of December is going to be what this is all about.
Yeah. And we'll see. Danny's been there. A lot of these players have been there. It's going to be great to watch, interesting to watch that along, of course, with the football stuff. All right. Thank you so much to Dirk Chatelain for joining us today. Please subscribe, follow, like, continue to listen and watch the Locked On Nebraska podcast. I will be back. Connor will be back with reaction this weekend to Nebraska at Minnesota. For now, thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Craig Sheeman breaks down the most exciting conference in college sports, from the rivalries to the championships and everything in between. Find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts.